Okay, welcome. This is Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is all about communications management. So as always, we're going to look at the learning objectives, page 389. So, understand the importance of good communication. Review key concepts related to it. Explain the elements of planning, communicating, how to create a communications management plan. Describe how to manage communications. Discuss methods for controlling communications, and then list various methods of improving, face-to-face meetings and things of that nature. Very good stuff in there, by the way. Describe how software could enhance all this. Cool. All right. So let's start with the opening case. You need to stop and read that for just a second. It talks about this guy named Peter who's kind of been doing projects, but never a huge project like the one he's working on now. And there's a significant penalty for cost or schedule overruns for his company, and there's multiple dependent projects where one project has to be completed before the next one, and he's concerned about being able to communicate the way he used to in a smaller environment, and he basically has a number two in charge who's an IT person who's good at doing electronic communication. So that's the basis for this case study. So on page 390 they talk about the basics of this thing. Well, the basics of this thing is communications is typically the reason why big projects fail. Is because the one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing, kind of thing. Which reminds me of this really cool quote from Cool Hand Luke. This is a classic 1960s kind of thing, and we'll just watch it.
You ever talk that way to me? No! Never! What we've got here is failure to communicate. Some men, you just...
Anyway, the point is, what we've got here is a failure to communicate is a fantastic quote. And I think it's kind of cool. I like it. Anyway, the idea is that a lot of projects fail because they can't talk to each other. And the larger the project, the more likely this is going to be a major issue. One of the reasons is technical jargon. People in the industry, no matter what it is, technical, medicine, whatever, use acronyms and phrases and stuff to speed things along and make it easier to communicate among peers. The problem is when you're not talking to peers, you're using a foreign language to them and they really can't understand you. And there's a possibility for some ambiguity in there, and technical jargon tends to kind of make things worse, particularly when you're talking between different disciplines. And like the people who do sales and marketing and graphics are going to have their own language, and the people in the software industry are going to have their own language, and guess what? It's not the same language. Okay. And the other is, because IT, the world, moves so rapidly, there's a gap between knowledge and experience. I mean, yeah, you can learn some of this stuff, but you're probably not going to be experienced in all these things, right? So that's a problem. And then in the past, maybe not so much now, but in the past, you could go get a technical degree. You can get a Bachelor of Science in computer science, or Bachelor of Science in computer information systems, and have no soft skills whatsoever in your degree plan. That's not the case for our university, but it's possible you could get a degree plan and never having done any reading or writing or oral presentations or any of those kind of things which we're talking about now, communication skills. Okay. And because of that, there's kind of a bias, so to speak, that people tend to think that IT folks are bad communicators. That's just kind of the impression. And perhaps from looking at it from last chapter's perspective about human resources, maybe it's well deserved. That a lot of the IT folks are kind of introverted and they don't really like to talk to people, and therefore they are not good communicators. Okay, there's a bullet list on page 390, which is kind of cool. And basically we're talking about, from an employer's perspective, what are employers kind of looking at, right? So the idea is that they're looking for a mix of both technical skills and those soft skills. And maybe soft skills is kind of insulting. What they're basically saying is tech skills and soft skills are together, that you don't have a bias from one to the other. So for example, what they're after is problem solving skills and teamwork, and being persuasive. Those are soft skills. Okay, cool. And that hiring decisions are based not just on your technical expertise. Yes, I know everything there is to know about this computer language. I'm an absolute expert. The fact that I can't talk to anyone is not relevant. No, that's not the case anymore. You don't hire people and bury them in the corner of your building. You basically have to have people. If you're going to have them work on a team, they're going to have to be team players. So you may not get hired unless you can show good communication skills. That's the point. All right. So the goal of communications management is basically I'm going to read this, to ensure the timely and appropriate generation, collection, dissemination, and storage of information. Okay, that's cool. So you know how the book goes. Every chapter we go into these little process groups, and so there's 3 process groups for this one. The planning one, which is basically talking about, what are the information needs of the stakeholders. You need to figure out the information, and maybe needs is not correct, but characteristics, like this guy likes email and this guy doesn't, that kind of thing. Managing, which is basically, that's the creating and the collection and dissemination and storage part, right? That's the mechanics of doing all this stuff. Controlling, which basically says, hey, we had a plan, and did it work? Did we meet the needs of the stakeholder? We thought that's what the plan was supposed to do, but now we need to find out, did it work? Okay, cool. So on page 392, they talk about the keys to good communication. So there's a cool thing in here. They talk about what good managers say they spend about 90% of their time communicating. That's kind of sort of what they do. They walk around and make sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing, but they're really talking to people. They're trying to find out what's going on. They're talking to their own folks. They're talking to other organizations. So if they're spending 90% of their time communicating, you think maybe that's a skill that they ought to have? Yeah, kind of makes sense, huh? So the first section they talk about is group and individual type of communication. So, here's another crazy story that, if you have a software project and you're behind schedule, let's say you're way behind schedule, and the management comes in and says, well, I know how to solve that problem. We're gonna add more programmers to the team. No, that is not going to help. Adding new people to the team after you're halfway through and you're behind schedule is probably going to have the opposite effect. It is not going to make the project run shorter. It's probably going to extend it out because you're going to be distracted from doing your work and spending all your time getting these people up to speed. Okay. So there's an entire book. In fact, there's a book called The Mythical Man Month. And the idea is that some managers believe that if a task takes 2 hours, two hours to do, that if I have 2 people, I can do it in 1 hour. And you might think, well, yeah. Well, that's just certainly not the case. Think about the construction industry, where it's going to take 2 days, for the concrete to dry before I can start doing any vertical construction. So I can't add more people to the team in order to do that faster. I still have to wait 2 days. There's a couple other cool analogies, like, you can't use 9 women to end up having a baby in 1 month. Okay, it's going to take 9 months. All right, there's lots of cool little sayings like that. The one I liked was, if a guy can dig a post hole in 1 minute, then you can get 60 people to dig that same post hole in 1 second. See, that don't work, does it? Okay, all right. So the idea is that adding people is not always the answer, and it's all because of just the way things work. So, you remember the personality traits of the people from the last chapter, right? So, if I'm planning on communicating with these folks, and I need to know, do I give them praise in public or in private? Is this a big picture kind of guy? Or is this in the trees, step-by-step instructions kind of thing? Do they need to understand the logic behind the decision? Or is it just going to be, oh, okay, you want us to do that? All right, whatever. So you need to know a little bit about your team to be able to communicate effectively with them. So they talk about several communication techniques that you can have at your disposal. So clearly oral, right? You can just go talk to people and put things in writing. It can be a visual presentation like a PowerPoint thing, where you're standing up against a chart with a laser pointer pointing at things. Could be an honest-to-God real face-to-face meeting where you get everybody together and, aren't you glad we got together here today to talk? Maybe even videos, although that seems a little strange. So sometimes you want to have open dialogue. You want to have a discussion going on. Sometimes you don't. And so, for example, in writing, that would be dang difficult to say, sure, send me your feedback. Or, do you have any concerns about this? You can't do that in writing. That would be excellent in an oral presentation or a meeting. But anyway, these other modes. And part of the problem is, depending on what your message is, you probably need to go to the lowest common denominator. A certain type of communication works for everybody. And we'll talk about this coming up, talking about a decision matrix on what mode to talk about. But let's just continue for a minute. So it could be that in order to meet everyone, I have to kind of dumb down a little bit and use a technique which works for everyone. The point. There are geographic and cultural differences. Let me tell you, I've run across this, and this is a little weird, but the time zone thing, it could be that you've got people all over the globe, and so it is not possible to pick a meeting time that suits everyone's needs. It just can't be done. I've got 7 different time zones and all over the planet, and somebody's going to have to get up in the middle of the night to watch, to go to this video teleconference, right? Because I can't make it happen where it suits everyone's needs. Units of measure. Okay, and you might think, well, yeah, metric system versus imperial and that kind of stuff. That's just one of them, all right? I've had this issue where I've sent somebody a document that had a date in it, and I used the traditional, 2-digit slash, 2-digit slash, 2-digit slash, right? So if I said, month, day, year, right? And I sent them off and said, this one is due. Well, let me tell you, the people in the United States think it's due on May 3rd. And the people in Europe think it's due on March 5th. Yeah. There's an awful lot of differences on, the date format that we use, month, day, year, is not necessarily. In fact, I try desperately not to even use date formats when I'm talking internationally, so to speak. I usually I spell it out. I spell out May 3rd. Okay. Anyway, those are obviously some big issues. And then there's a choice between formal and informal communication. So, the thing here is that you can't just submit a report and then assume everyone's happy. Well, it says in our communications plan I'm supposed to submit a weekly status report, and yeah, I've been doing that, and I haven't heard back, so I guess everything's fine. No, that's not the way it works. Communication is a two-way street, and both parties are responsible for successful communication, right? You've probably heard that before. If there's a failure to communicate, it's basically two parties that have that failure, not one. So you can't just assume that everything you submitted and everybody's happy. Okay. Hey, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. This is a good place to pause.